here. There was another piece here.
I don't believe this, man. I really don't believe it. There's going to be an army out there, man.
Where was it? Piece here.
Time, man. This is supposed to get in the same way the driver on the whole
Start over.
Have you guys ever been so mad at a character? Like, just, what are you doing, dude?
I was trying to think of an example of another character.
Is it like...
I feel like I'm similarly mad at the line cook in Heat when he quits his job. I was like, no, dude, you can't do that.
By Michael Mann, who had an uncredited writing credit on Straight Time.
Oh,
yes.
interesting.
Yeah. So that's what we'll get to at the end of the show, near the end of the show. But introduce us, Dan, because I always mess up the tagline.
Oh, Film Trace. This is a podcast where we trace the life of film from conception to production, all the way to release and reception. It is our Stranger Than Fiction cycle. We are on episode 5, the 1970s. And we're serving up 2 films for you based on a true story. Dog Day Afternoon from 1975 and Straight Time from 1978. And who's our guest we have with us? Chris, go for it.
Welcome, Riley, back to the pod. Thanks for joining us again.
Thanks for having me. Hi, guys.
Yes.
You were on, what was the last episode you were on? You were on
was it 28
days later, yeah.
28 Days Later, classic.
And you're known for doing like directorial filmography watches. And
right.
Did our revisitation of 28 Days Later have any role in you deciding to focus on Danny Boyle as one of your filmographies this year?
I wish I could say yes, but no, I planned these out several years. If I'm being honest, I planned these out several years in advance. So no, it did not.
In fact, if anything, you probably shied me away from.
I will say though that I just watched it again recently because I am again doing the Danny Boyle watch, and there were things that came up in our discussion that I saw and paid a different kind of attention to this watch. So that was.
You're saying Film Trace helped illuminate the film for you, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
There you go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
You had an extra lens by which to.
you can blurb me on that.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll put it on the DVD cover.
VHS box. Okay. What do we got? Dog Day Afternoon. What's our Sidney Lumet? What do we got going on with him? What's our personal baggage / history with Sidney, with this movie? I'll start. I've never seen it before.
Wait, what the fuck? You picked this.
Yeah, no. That's why I picked it, because I'd never seen it before. Incredibly famous movie. I think growing up, I've heard of this movie constantly. And yeah, it's just one of those movies that I wanted to check out. Fits perfectly into our Stranger Than Fiction cycle. I'm trying to think of like the other Sidney Lumet movies that I have seen. Serpico I liked a lot. 12 Angry Men's awesome. I love Network. Network's probably one of my favorite movies. But yeah, so kind of like not a huge history with the movie, a little bit of history with Sidney. What about you guys? What's going on with you?
I'll let the guests go, and I'll top it off.
Yeah, I'd seen this film once before, maybe about 10 years ago. Haven't seen a lot of his other work. I mean, 12 Angry Men, Network also. Did he do Before the Devil Knows You're Dead? I did not.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay. So
like
I've seen that.
Film,
I
think. Well,
interesting. Yeah. So yeah, not a big history with this director. I did see, like I said, I saw this film a while ago. I did enjoy it, so I was interested to see how it held up for me in the rewatch. And I'll leave you hanging.
Sure, of course. I've loved him for a long time, to be honest. And I actually taught Dog Day Afternoon for the first time last semester because I have a biopic unit, and we kind of focus not just on like the traditional formulaic biopic, but just based on true stories in general. Movies where the protagonist is based on a real person. And I had gotten sick of teaching. Can't believe I'm saying it, but I had been teaching Goodfellas in that unit for such a long time. And I just finally wanted to be like, I want to try something else. Also, Goodfellas is just like so long that it takes up so much of the curriculum time. Anyways, and I was a little worried because obviously it's older, but high schoolers loved it. They were super into it.
Yeah,
they were like
I could see that,
glued to the screen. Like, and I often show movies that result in at least half of the class like checking their phones. So I was really pleased with that. And and this is like one of my like shortest periods between rewatches. So obviously I watched it with my class just half a year ago, and then watched it again for the episode. But I'd also seen it at least half a dozen times before. It was definitely one of the movies rewatched. I like bought like a used VHS at like a giant like video retailer, used video retailer, back when I was like 15. And just solely based on the fact that like they had a huge sale, and it was one of those movies that I knew was famous, and it involved Al Pacino and crime. So I was like, yeah, this is no brainer. Throw it in the cart for $5. So I've been pretty obsessed with this movie and Sidney Lumet in general. 12 Angry Men. Did you read that? Dan and I went to high school together. Did you read that in high school?
I don't think so. No.
No, Dan, did you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah. So we watched the movie in high school too after we read it.
Yeah, that's the first time I saw it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So like from the get go, like in high school was also when I started like paying attention to directors, and so like I knew at that point that like he had done not only 12 Angry Men but also Dog Day, and then Serpico was another big one.
Yeah.
For me, like later in high school, and then Network, like you mentioned, and we almost covered this movie on our last cycle that Lumet did called Equus, about the boy and the horse, also based on a play like 12 Angry Men, and then we also did a former episode of Film Trace about a Sidney Lumet movie. Do you know which one, Dan?
Death Trap.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like, and then that's not upper echelon when it comes to Sidney Lumet, but it's still
as they say.
It's still. I think it's a fun one. I think it's fun. Interesting.
It's fun.
Yeah. But yeah, but then like his after that, and The Verdict came out the same year.
Yeah.
His career kind of went off a cliff.
He had a long career. Like you said, he did like 50 films or something. So he kind of like faded as some directors do at an older age.
Yeah, and he also has a book that's a pretty notable when it comes to like books by directors called Making Movies. And that's a mainstay on my bookshelf in my classroom. It's a really great read. He's definitely like a journeyman type of guy, but it's interesting because like he both like fits the mold of like those kind of 70s directors without a lot of like the pretentious air of like Coppola or Scorsese.
He's not like the auteur. No, he's not like
exactly. Yeah. So, and it's just there's lots of fun stories in there, including about Dog Day Afternoon. So, I'm excited to get into it. I might. I'd be curious to hear. Can we start with before we get into opinions and takeaways, the true story behind it, right? That's how we have been starting these episodes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's all true, basically.
Every single detail.
Well, it's interesting. So it's all based on a Life magazine article that came out, I think, right near maybe a month after the bank robbery. So this bank robbery did happen in Brooklyn, August 1972. And it kind of, if you kind of go to the facts, the movie does follow it pretty darn closely. The young guy who we see run off in the beginning, that happened in real life. He was caught 2 days later. the way that it plays out. Now, a lot of the sort of media part of it and the circus part of it, that seems to be played up a bit in the movie. There certainly was a crowd there and stuff like that, and the media was involved, but it didn't seem like it was as a circus-like atmosphere as the movie makes it seem to be. But yeah, and eventually they go to the airport, and Al Pacino's character in real life, I can't even pronounce his name, John Wojciech, I want to say. He survives, and Salvatore gets shot. He doesn't get shot in the head, he gets shot in the chest. So that's one difference. And the FBI guy, I think he pulled the gun from the floor, not from a false panel on the side of the car. That being said, for the most part, pretty accurate, including the part where it is revealed that John, the real life character, is doing this to help pay for his lover's sex reassignment surgery, which is all part of the sort of true story around this whole thing.
And that's the outdated term, right? Gender reassignment surgery.
Gender reassignment surgery. I apologize.
But that's what it was referred to at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think for the most part, it's kind of, I don't know. Did you guys find anything that like totally took a lot of liberties with it? I don't know. It seems pretty straight down the middle, I guess.
I mean, I have some thoughts because I had a longer relationship with the film, but you go first, Riley.
Well, yeah, I don't know probably the real story well enough to compare. Something that I wondered about though is I don't know is it the Stockholm syndrome? I mean, like they clearly grew to like Sonny, especially, and it's almost like they're kind of pulling for him as the movie goes on, with a little hiccup once they find out part of the reason that he's doing it for. It seems like there's some judgment going on there, not unexpectedly in the 1970s. But for the most part, it seems like they really connect with him and his everyman type of vibes, and to the point where they're even kind of fighting back against the police throughout the whole ordeal. So I was wondering how much that was played up, or how much that actually happened in that situation. I guess I don't know for sure, but it was an interesting aspect of the film.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely people that know way more about this. There's been entire documentaries and nonfiction books about this single incident. But some of the things that have stood out to me over the years, probably first and foremost, is Pacino's performance. He's so good at getting you to empathize with Sonny and all those other factors surrounding him, from the hostages. You know, you could argue Stockholm syndrome versus like just the kind of anti-establishment vibe of the decade that we're in right now, the 1970s. But the kind of big piece that I feel is missing, and if they included it, you could argue it would make it a worse film, and that Sidney Lumet was smart for not diving too far into it. And he was very much kind of part of that naturalist movement of crime films in the 70s, where he didn't want to give away too much, right? He wanted to show instead of tell. And it all takes place during one day in a single setting, which adds to not only the tension and suspense and kind of grit of the film, but also makes it easy to ignore a lot of the details that happen outside of that single day. And so like it doesn't take too much Googling about the guy that Al Pacino's playing here. Real name, John Wojciech, or however you say it, Wojciech. But the kind of the biggest thing that just like would completely change anyone's reading of the film, no matter how empathetic Pacino and Lumet make him seem, is there was a third guy helping them with the attempted bank robbery, and he ran away before it became clear that they were surrounded. And this third guy, whose name was Robert Westenberg, the night before the robbery, the three of them, along with Sal, shared a hotel room, and Wojciechowicz raped Westenberg. And he admits it in multiple pieces of media, including a documentary about Wojciechowicz, where he's heavily featured in front-facing interviews while in prison. And he retells the rape in a way that is pretty awful, and like this is a bad person. He's not the genial bank robber, fuck the man kind of rebel that we see in the film. So that's huge to me, I think. Even if like you said, Dan, I think it still remains true. What we see on screen is pretty identical, at least in the history books of what happened that day.
Yeah, like if you look, I'm looking at the Life article right now, and it's like it's almost like Sidney looked at this article and like cast people based on like the photos. I mean, Al Pacino looks just like this guy, like just like him. And in fact, I think I read somewhere, I think it was an AFI, that one of the reasons that he got involved is like a script supervisor, even before there was a director, saw a home video of John's wedding. And then said, well, why you look like Al Pacino? I mean, like, it's like, that was a whole thing. So yeah, that's a really, really strong point. And it goes to, in terms of like the outside context or the paratext of a film like this, is that you're right. We see a single day of this guy's life. And in that day, he's the anti-hero. He's the Attica, you know what I mean? Like, he's riling up these people. But I think I would say the truth is like, it's tough. I mean, I wonder if even Sidney knew any. I mean, did any of that stuff come out when this was happening? You also have to we have to think about like how much was John actually involved in this, right?
Yeah.
In the film itself, it's like I don't really know the answer to that, but I do know. I was reading somewhere that crazily he ended up paying for his partner's gender. What's the appropriate term? Gender change surgery.
Gender reassignment surgery.
Gender reassignment
surgery.
No,
sorry. Now that I say that out loud, it's isn't it gender confirmation surgery now?
Gender confirmation surgery. He ends up paying for that via the movie rights that he sold to this. Right. So it's like there's so many layers here of complication and sort of intertwined closeness to the reality that it's like, it's tough to even make a film about something like this and not be wrong. And really wrong. And I think like the fact that this movie is so famous and so well regarded, like 6 Academy nominations, one for Best Original Screenplay, it kind of gives it a little bit of a Teflon-ness to it, where, when we look at it, we try to criticize it. It's, people will be like, well, that may be true, but did Sidney know about that? Or did the screenplayer know? You know what I mean? How it can get get really defensive really quickly.
Of course.
Like a movie like this. I don't know. I mean, that's my take on it.
And we have these several decades since to like the life of the film. Like Lumet's dead. So like how much can you really poke holes in it in a way that like says that straight up quote Lumet exploited the scenario and fantasized it or like rose-colored glasses it. One other last thing, and then I'm curious because like me, Riley had seen it several years ago and then saw it again recently. So I'd be curious to see how it's changed during the interim for you. Last thing I'll say in terms of like the worrisome stuff is Wojciechowicz also wrote an unpublished letter to the New York Times upon the release of the film. And he says in the letter, and once again, this is a bad dude who's saying this, but he claimed in that letter that he had an agreement in writing for 1% of the net profits and a verbal agreement for 2% of the gross from the movie. So yes, that's the kind of the money thing that gets in so much more of the press and historicizing about the film is about him like using the selling of the rights to pay for his second wife's surgery. But he also says that like there was a lot of wheeling and dealing with producers, and he goes on in his letter to say that, quote, exploitation is a dirty word, but I have been exploited as well, as my family and friends have.
Right. It's like
And,
he's playing both sides of the coin.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, I don't know. It's messy, just like all of the films in our series here have been. But
this one's especially messy. Like this one, because it was made so soon after the robbery.
2.5 years.
Still in prison, I think. I didn't get out until 87.
Right.
So yeah, this one's messy as hell. Riley, what's your take on all this?
Well, I didn't know anything about, I guess, the character, or John. That's his real name. John?
Yeah.
John, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know his backstory beyond what was on the screen, so I'm still processing all that, I guess. But, and I guess it kind of feeds into, I feel like I've heard Chris offer his thesis on this entire cycle about how can, based on a true story, not exploit.
Yeah.
Because that's ultimately what's going to happen. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, there's a whole like philosophical discussion to have about, can you appreciate the film for what it is, regardless of what Lumet knew or didn't know at the time, or what kind of profit was made and by whom and when and for what and in what way. And I don't know. I mean, I think the movie overall still works as it is for me. I mean, I was just as riveted this time watching it, knowing everything, that's going to happen. And it kind of almost more so watching it unfold as a tragedy, because that is how it's going to end. I didn't the first time. I didn't know anything about it the first time I watched it. So, I mean, it still works as a great piece of cinema for me. The question that I have is, like, it is compelling. And what if this is a movie that's put on screen without any of the baggage of it being real? I mean, is it a double-edged sword here? Like, is this more compelling because it was a true story? Or is it, but that also kind of maybe wrecks the watch for some people, or most people in some ways, because of the backstory that we now know about the central character. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, I don't know. That's a tough one to wrestle with. Can you go first, Dan? Because I'm wrestling with it.
Yeah, I have strong opinions.
Jump in.
There's no reason this needs to be based on a true story. Like there's like zero. Like the value of this film and the way that it was shot and the way that it was done is honestly mostly in like the craftsmanship of it. The acting's unbelievably good. Pacino's off the charts. John Cazale is unbelievable as he is in the fine films that he was in. The writing, I think there's things about it that I like. The one thing that, as someone who had never seen it before and has seen it for the first time as a 40-year-old with all this sort of praise behind it, the one thing that I was perplexed by was that it's a really good, gritty crime film with phenomenal acting and really tight editing and a great script. But there's, to me, like the weird thing about it is like, it's kind of a genre film in the sense that like it's really good B-movie material, and it's elevated by a great cast and a great director and all these amazing people who have worked on films for a long time. It doesn't really go beyond that for me. So like the real, the true story aspect of this, and we're also incredibly far removed from the true story, right? And the people who actually lived through this and were a part of it. It just doesn't, if anything, the true story aspects to this really take away from the film. I mean, that's just my viewpoint of it now, but I'm so far removed from it. You know what I mean?
The only argument that I've been able to come up with while you've been talking, Dan, is, and it's just like everything else about this film is complicated, is that I think it was a really big flashpoint for LGBTQ rights.
Yeah.
but it has that added layer of, yes, it was one of the only films, mainstream films anyways, at the time, to just like outwardly have a gay protagonist.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, your gay protagonist is a criminal. And so that, but I don't know how, regardless of like the duality of that, or the, harm that perhaps also propagates about the LGBTQ community in a time where that community is not very visible, due to discrimination, homophobia, and transphobia, but also like the fact that that has a basis in reality kind of helps that it's not just somebody, like, it's not Brian De Palma dressed to kill, like coming up with a fictional, gay slasher or
So like
anything like that.
Authenticity to it.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, and also it adds to the whole vibe that is changed for the film or heightened for the film to show that kind of damn the man mentality. Cause it's not just like, showing, the horrors of capitalism and, like working class versus upper class, or like average person versus law enforcement. But it also is very much like straight up, like, nobody's going to help me be who I am, or let my wife be who she is. So I'm going to take matters into my own hands. But I don't know. I think that, so yeah, I actually think more so than maybe I'm going to come at loggerheads with you, Dan. I think more so than any other film in this cycle, it matters that this one was based on a true story.
Interesting. Riley, what do you think? What's your sort of take on that?
You posed the question. You better damn answer it.
Well, I think what I'm hung up on is that, I mean, they could have done like a Law and Order treatment of this, like rip from the headlines, but change all of the, necessary, mold it to fit what you want it to do. Which obviously there's always some degree going on, but the true life story is very interesting. And what they chose to leave, well, I shouldn't say chose. We don't know that he chose to leave out those details about John or Sonny, but that is where it becomes problematic, because those details are problematic, but also the omission of those details is problematic, whether or not, we knew about them going into making the film. But I think the story is itself very interesting. I'm just sticking strictly to the story thing, not the bigger picture, like what this means in the world and to the world for the story to be told, but just that it's an interesting story. And I'm hung up on whether or not that's responsible to just tell the story
as a viewer
just,
to be
just
like,
because it's interesting. Yeah.
Let me separate these two. I mean, yeah, it is tough, but I think, at the end of the day, my mind and all this stuff is like, art is not reality. It's just not, right? Like in any attempt for it to reflect reality is going to be a failure. There's just not a lot of crossover. Like it's a made up story technically. No matter if someone wrote all this stuff down, it's someone interpreting what somebody wrote down from someone else's perspective. It's like so far removed from what actually happened in terms of just reality that is like, look, it's just a movie at the end of the day. And it's like the strength of it is in its own sort of messaging and narrative that it creates for itself. Its connection to some real story, I don't know. To me, it's mostly irrelevant. It just doesn't. It doesn't matter, right? I mean, the only thing I would say is that, like, yeah, if you're using the reality of this situation in a way that is trying to, and I'm sure that they did this, so I'm sort of going to talk back on it a bit. It's based on a true story, inspired by a true story. But that's marketing bullshit. It's all marketing bullshit, and it's anytime that's ever said, it's all complete bullshit for the most part. Because at the end of the day, when you're making a piece of art, it's not gonna be, it's not a news report, right? It's just not. But if you walk that line like they did here, you can kind of get people to think that it is. And I'm sure people want to go see this thinking, oh, this is real. This is what really happened, right? But it's still a movie at the end of the day. It's still made up. You know, it's still a work of fiction. So
yeah, I mean, this goes back to the whole Fargo thing of like what the words say at the beginning of the film.
What does it say in the beginning of Fargo?
Oh, you know, Coen brothers decided to be funny to say it's based on a true story when it's not.
Doesn't the Blair Witch Project do that too?
Yeah. But I think it's interesting that Dog Day Afternoon. Here, I found it good. It doesn't say. I think the word, I don't know. Now we're getting into semantics, but I don't want to excite you too much, Dan. But whereas most movies use the word based on, Dog Day Afternoon's opening title says, "What you are about to see is true. It happened in Brooklyn, New York, on August 22nd, 1972."
Yeah, of course it says that.
So
that's even more problematic. Yeah.
Yes.
It's incredibly problematic. Yeah. But I guess the point is that like the true story part of all this is always marketing. It's always a marketing technique.
Well, and is that the problem? Like, if they just didn't say anything? What if they just didn't say anything? Like, what if we didn't have that any kind of notice at the beginning of any movie that's quote unquote based on actual events or whatever they want to say? Just drop that.
You could. Yeah, you totally could. But they're not going to because they want to make money.
But isn't it inherently like philosophically, like we're all socialists here, right? Like that's
of course, absolutely.
What is that feels. There's something about that feels ethically wrong.
Oh, I mean, you see, if you go down that line, it's like, why even release a movie for money at all? Why don't you just, it's everything is tied up in the capitalist system. There's no escape. There's no escape. But I think the point that I'm trying to make is this, very specifically. The based on a true story thing is only there to get people in the door, right? Once they're in the door and they're watching it, it's a film. It is separate from like they're in a dark theater. When they saw this, they paid like what, 5 cents to see it. I don't know what tickets cost back then. They're like a movie theater, and so it's like
Nickelodeon. Is that going to a storefront and see a talkie?
And they're in the theater and they're watching and they're experiencing this film, this movie. I don't know. To me, the reality of whatever happened. No matter how much they try to tie it to it, no matter how much they try to market to it, it's severely separated from that. And that's just the way that I see it. And I think that's also how people experience it if they say otherwise, even if they say otherwise. Because at the end of the day, they're not seeing the real story play out. You know what I mean? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, you're talking nonsense. You're justifying it. No, I'm just kidding. It makes sense. I want to be morally superior, and I'm sorry.
Well, it's art. It can't be. Art has no morality. Right? It doesn't exist.
God damn it.
Oh man, what else do we want to say about Dog Day Afternoon? I feel like we're just.
I meant to say this earlier when we opened the conversation about the hostages and Stockholm syndrome. One of the reasons that interplay works so well with the women working at the bank and Al Pacino is that like Al Pacino like couch surfed on those actresses in those actresses' homes while he was like in the early 70s and late 60s. So like before The Godfather.
Really?
So they knew him as they had kind of all been surrogate, not all, I think like 3 of them were like, including Carol Kane, were like surrogate mothers to him during his rise in Hollywood. So I think that really helps that kind of dynamic between those characters. And then I also think that obviously with John Cazale, here's one bit about the real Sal that didn't make it into the film. And I think there's, probably artistic reasons that could justify not really giving him a motive versus Sonny. But the real Sal Naturel, he was motivated by trying to get his two younger sisters out of the foster care system.
Jeez,
And he was also just like, he was a disturbed person, not sure how any kind of bank robbery result would help, having two younger
he's
sisters.
also 18 years old
care.
in reality.
Right. Yeah.
And John Cazale was 39 when he shot this.
Yeah. And that was the thing. It was like, Sidney Lumet didn't want him for the part, right? Until Al Pacino convinced him to let him read. And it's like, if you convince anybody to watch John Cazale for more than 30 seconds, they're going to say yes to whatever the guy wants, right?
Wasn't there a moment? I don't know. It was almost like a throwaway moment. Didn't they have like a pact? If they didn't get out, they weren't going to get out alive. Did I make that up, or was there a moment in there where they said that was the end? Like, especially from Sal's perspective, or was
Sal was very fatalistic, extremely fatalistic,
right?
But I don't remember that exact moment though.
Oh, yeah, I feel like there was some line.
It's like alluded to without being said directly.
Okay.
Like it's like a look he gives him, and he says something like, "You promised." Oh, what is that? No, I
something
totally
like that. Yeah. Okay.
Well, here's one thing that I didn't understand on first watch: is Al Pacino, John here? Is he playing along with the FBI at all? I feel like there's some weird sort of facial stuff back and forth between him and the FBI guy, where the FBI guy's kind of warning him, you have your chance to get out. You have the chance to get out. I don't know. Did I misread some of that?
Like when the FBI guy comes in once it's nighttime?
Yeah, there's like this sort of these exchanges between him and Al Pacino that almost seem like Pacino's kind of considering what the FBI guy is saying, almost. Maybe not fully, but like little tinges of it. I don't know. That's kind of what I read into. Like, he's having a lot of doubt about what he's doing and why he's even doing it. Maybe we should just sort of go along with what they want to do. I don't know.
I definitely that's part of the magic of Pacino's performance.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. There's like a doubt there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a long simmering doubt. There's kind of a long simmering like self-loathing, and I think that's one of the things that just like the film in general, like you could read into so many different moments in that film and come away with something different. Yeah. But that reminds me that that's one of the reasons the film was so interesting to show to my students, because the discussion afterwards resulted in like so many different takeaways on whether or not, Sal really, like one of my students had like a theory that like Sal was Sonny's hostage. Like it seemed like he was, that like Sonny had some kind of leverage on him. Like why wouldn't Sal just...
He was very quiet. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's teenager wisdom, but still it's interesting.
I agree with it.
I think, the last thing for real this time
sure.
is like, going back to Lumet as a director, and yes, he's a journeyman, and yes, he had like lots of ups and downs and a very varied career on purpose. But it comes, I think one of the things that brings Dog Day Afternoon back into the conversation, linking the best of his films together, like Network and 12 Angry Men, is that it very much, even though it's tension packed and there's a lots of back and forth between interior, exterior, it's essentially a play, right?
Yeah.
And he purposely did that before shooting most of his films, but especially this one, basically rehearsed it like a play. There's a very interesting interview with Carol Kane about kind of seeing it from her perspective, because she was in that smaller supporting role, and seeing like they would literally like go to a huge conference room and like block out the whole thing and like put like a divider down the room for exterior versus interior, have like a big piece of furniture to represent the vault, and like he made sure that before they pressed record on anything that they had the entire thing planned out. And that like, and I think that kind of adds to like that lived in feeling of the movie.
Oh yeah, especially in the first 30 minutes when it's just starting. The way that they ping pong dialogue off of each other, it's clearly like massively rehearsed.
Yeah,
you can't just do that cold read. Like it's not going to happen.
Yeah, there's no table read. It's yeah.
And they cut the fat a lot too, and that probably helped with that. I mean, there's not a wasted moment in the film. So all that rehearsal probably winnowed it down to its essence, I guess.
Yeah,
that stood out to me is how tight the film is. There's just with some older films, because of the, I don't know, I feel like attention spans were a little bit longer back then. Like movies in the 80s and 70s, like they could kind of languish in some shot. This one, no, tight as a drum, tight as a snare drum.
Yep. Oh my god, I forgot this is stupid. For real, this is the last one. I'm just looking through all the trivia. The guy who delivers the pizza and says like, I'm a fucking star. Yeah. Great moment in the film. Spike Lee reused that actor for the pizza delivery person in Inside Man.
Nice.
And also the pizza box says Sal's Famous Pizzeria. So it's Spike Lee having a bit of cinematic pastiche fun. Yeah.
Easter egg. All right, shall we move on to the chaser? Straight Time, 1978, directed by Ulu Grossbard, starring Dustin Hoffman, Harry Dean Stanton, Gary Busey, Teresa Russell. How do you say his name? Emmett Walsh?
Yeah, it's a tongue twister.
Yeah, that's a tongue twister. So I had never seen this movie before. I had no idea it existed. But sometimes when we do these cycles, I kind of don't want to do well-known stuff because it's kind of boring. So I just dug a little bit deeper and I found this movie. And I was glad that I found it. It is based on a book by an ex-con. He was just a con when this movie was getting shot. Edward Bunker. A book called No Beast So Fierce came out a few years before this. So it's kind of it's one of those movies where it's based on a novel based on somebody's life, so it's a little bit of a distant sort of true to story thing. Have you guys seen this movie before? Ever heard it before?
No,
I hadn't either, which is funny because I watched a lot of Dustin Hoffman in college, but this one
missed you
off my radar.
It had a strange release, I think, is one of the problems, and it kind of has been lost a little bit because it did not perform very well at the box office. What do you guys think of it?
I was very excited to watch this movie because it seems like it should be a 70s classic, even if it's kind of lost to time. But it does seem to have a lot. It has gone through a lot of kind of bolstering and reappraisal over the years. But it's hard to like watch any movie on the heels of Dog Day Afternoon. But yeah, I really liked it. It's definitely one that I want to revisit after spending some time away from it, because once again, the whole true life element and the whole production history of the film is messy as hell.
It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. So,
Riley,
what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, thankfully I watched it before I watched Dog Day Afternoon or rewatched Dog Day Afternoon. No, I really enjoyed it, and I too would be interested to go back. Because there's a point at which it really turns. I couldn't tell where this thing was going. I thought it was just an interesting character study of this guy, and like, where's the, stranger than fiction moment? But there's a moment that it really turns on. So I kind of like to go back again sometime and watch those first 45 minutes or so before the moment where this film takes its detour, or I guess not detour, but goes off in a different direction. I did enjoy it, and it's interesting where it turns, though.
Yes. So I'm curious because, like, I one of the reasons that I'm eager to rewatch it is the specific piece of production drama. I guess it's pre-production drama. I don't know of how much of the film was actually directed by Dustin Hoffman.
Yeah, it's hard to tell because the sources are like, oh, he spent a few days and then he basically was like, I can't do this. Then someone wrote in 98, the assistant director, Jerry Zeismer, was like, oh, like he basically did like one shot in the prison. So it's kind of like, it's hard to tell, but it didn't sound like he lasted very long.
The report I read was 10 weeks.
What?
Which is like a huge
love
chunk
it.
of filming time. I don't know.
You could film this whole movie in 10 weeks.
Right.
It's amazing.
But I mean,
I don't know when Ulu, I don't know when he sort of popped on. I'm trying to figure out where I think I saw it somewhere when he took over. But yeah, it was messy as hell.
Right.
Like it's also like a weird production situation because like this is part of First Artist Production, which is something that was like set up with oh my god, Paul Newman, Sidney Poitier, Barbara Streisand, Steve McQueen, and Hoffman. We're all part of this thing where it's basically, you know, you trade your upfront salary for artistic autonomy. And that's what ended up sort of having this movie blow up when it was released, lawsuits back and forth about like how much autonomy was there. Did Warner Brothers come in and recut the movie? I think there's some quote about like, I think Hoffman says like only the first 20 minutes was his film. It's like, yeah, it's crazy. It's all over the place, which is, you know, no wonder that it's kind of been lost because it never had a splash, I think, when it came out.
Right.
And it was just easily forgotten, you know, a month later.
It was Gene Siskel's favorite movie of the year.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
but,
crazy.
I mean, that's before the zeitgeist of Siskel and Ebert.
Yeah, I literally had never heard of this movie. And when I went to go look it up, I was like, this can't be real.
Right.
It's got like Dustin Hoffman, Gary Busey. What's going on? Kathy Bates shows up.
Yeah.
I know. It's
Emma Walsh too. Huh?
Yes.
Yeah. And unlike Dog Day Afternoon, where it seemed like there was a good amount of distance between the criminal subject and the filmmakers.
Yeah.
Like Hoffman's and Michael Mann, who, like we mentioned at the top of the show in the cold open, had an uncredited version of the script. Like worked very closely with him, like to the point where it reminded me of how he discussed
Thief. Right?
Thief. Well, oh yeah, there's Thief for sure too. To keep it in Michael Mann's wheelhouse, but our episode about Bronson and Tom Hardy's on again, off again friendship with the guy he was playing, the insane person he was playing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. There's parts of that I think really help the film, where it seems like you really get in like this internal space. Like there's so many movies about criminals where you get to see that moment of them like making that terrible decision, and they're kind of inscrutable. But one of the special things about this movie is that scene where he breaks, where he's been just like shoved around, manipulated by his parole officer, and left for dead essentially, even though he's gotten himself on on the right side of things, and he just snaps in the car with M. Emmett Walsh in the driver's seat. And like that really seemed like there was a lot of consideration for like why recrimination is so common in our society. But at the same time, it just feels like, I don't know, like he's our only three-dimensional character. Like,
yeah, that's not that far off, I would say.
Right. And so that's the thing I was struggling with, especially because there's so many great actors in those supporting roles. Like I kept wanting to be like, I don't know. I couldn't quite tell what the film was going for with his like rage freak out on Gary Busey.
Yeah.
Even though I don't like, I don't know. I'm curious, where did your empathies lie in the film? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe that's one of the things that makes the film so compelling.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. This is like, it has that 1970s anti-hero like grittiness, almost like maybe like existentialist, maybe,
Sure.
where it's like, I mean, the ending's literally perfection. I want to get caught. I mean, it's just like, it's so perfect. And it's so, to me, if I'm watching this film now and thinking about the 70s, which I did not live through, to me, it's like it's just a really, really good example of sort of an ideology, a zeitgeist that was going on back then, of sort of just, maybe you call it despair. What did Carter call it? Malaise of like this sort of almost like cultural depression about everything, about like nothing was going to get better. And you didn't really have a choice, in his case, it almost seems like it's fate itself that is driving him back to make these stupid choices, these dumb choices he does not need to make. And he does it over and over and over again. And you play that clip in the beginning of the show, but that's who he is. Right. And I think that there's a certain sort of, that's a very specific statement to make. It's not a happy statement, but it is a very strong thesis statement about who this character is. And I think, to me, that's what sticks with me more than anything. It's like, it's a really bold artistic statement. I don't know, Riley, what do you think?
Well, yeah, it spends, the first chunk, excuse me, of the movie devoted to making us interested in this, character. All this stuff seems to be happening to him. He seems to be trying to do the right thing, and it stores up a lot of that goodwill from the audience towards him, I'd say, because the second half of the movie, regardless of what drove him there, he's pretty terrible. I mean,
awful.
He's terrible to trying to think of
Gary Busey.
Gary Busey, and is it the character Jenny, I guess. Jen, yep. And then, and Harry Dean Stanton's character too, Jerry, the clip that you played at the beginning. I mean, he's frustrated, and then moments later, that's the end for him.
Well, I mean, it's kind of crazy when you think about it, because in the scene where he shoots Gary Busey, I'm like, you're mad at him, but it's your fucking fault.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Because you stayed in the bank way longer than you should, or the watch store or the jewelry store way longer than you needed to, and you're going to blame him for him getting scared when you screwed up. I mean, it's such like narcissistic bullshit behavior.
He breaks bad, right? I mean, that's like
the original Walter White.
Yeah, right.
But I think there's a way you play that and you try and make it empathetic, or there's like the end of The Shield. It's just like, no, this is dark.
Yeah.
This is dark, and it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to go anywhere well. And that's just his fate in life because of who he is and what he's done. Not a happy statement, but I think a very slightly honest one.
And it's interesting to watch, because there aren't that many movies with Dustin Hoffman where he's so cold-blooded, right?
Correct. Yeah. Well, Riley, what do you think? I don't know. I didn't watch a lot of Dustin Hoffman back in the day.
Oh yeah. You watched a lot.
No, I mean, he's usually like the underdog, but not in a likable way. With the exception, I'm trying to think if there's even he's Rizzo and Midnight Cowboy.
Yeah, Midnight Cowboy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's usually that central lead that is a generally likable character, even in his offbeat, an offbeat type of character. But and that's why I think it's so important that like it's a weird balance in this movie, because you do care about him at least early on, but it really stretches your patience or your empathy. I guess it really tests your empathy by the time you get to the end of this thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think one thing that's fascinating about Bunker, who's the real guy behind it, that it's based on, is that he comes from a Hollywood family himself.
Oh, nice.
He was born to a chorus girl mother who was in Busby Berkeley musicals, and a studio grip father. So he has like that. He knows what he clearly grew up around it, like the idea of like being sensational and ready for camera and like narcissism, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah.
so, I mean, not to armchair psychoanalyze, but it feels like it has all these elements that it's it's really hard to look away from because it's so enthralling, and yet that's also part of like the I don't know the like I don't know. I just get like, is this knot in my stomach? And
Yeah.
and I that's it. It's impressive that they're able to do that. I don't know, and it's also like compounded by the fact. One of the reasons I was mentioning the idea of like Dustin Hoffman as a despicable person is because during Me Too he had allegations come out.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I remember this. Yeah.
And so it's like, oh yeah, I can kind of see how he is a skis and harasser.
But it's funny that like Bunker, the guy who wrote is based on his life. Like, I think the interesting part is that he wrote the book. It got published, I think, in like 72, 73. And then he robbed a bank afterwards, after it was published.
I didn't realize that was after
prison. Yeah. And then he got out, I think the story was that he got out to like help with this movie a little bit as like a parole thing or something.
Yeah. And so like Hoffman
Jesus,
collaborating with him is just like feeding into that whole.
But we say that, but it's not like it's like some self-aggrandizing movie, right? At the end of the day, it's like insanely depressing.
True.
And like the final shot is sort of like maybe he thought that was aggrandizing, or maybe the director does, but it's not. It's like, it's like he's stuck forever being that person. You know what I mean? No one learns anything. The Seinfeld mantra. No hugs. Nobody learns anything. All right, cool. What do we got some trivia?
Yes. You guys
Let's
ready?
Do trivia. Let's do it.
So it sounds like you've listened to at least one of our episodes from this season, Riley. But just to recap, we're closing out with 5 movie descriptions that may or may not be real films, but all based on true stories. So starting with number 1. This was I didn't actually write them, so I'm going to have some ums and ahs in between them this time. I apologize. Based on the infamous true story of the feral boy found in the rural district of Avrion in southern France. This film sold more than any other film in France for the past decade, the prior decade in 1970, and was also helmed by the very famous auteur behind several surreal masterpieces, including The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, Francois Truffaut. Real or fake?
I'm gonna say real.
I'll say, I'll just to be contrary, I'll say fake.
Yeah.
That one is real.
Yes.
There is the Feral Boy movie does
People
exist.
love Feral Boy movies. That's
I know. Yeah, they ate it up in France, and even though it's not seen as one of Truffaut's best, especially because it's from kind of an off period of his filmography, it's that sensational story. I remember hearing about that story like in middle school, and being
it's like a famous historical thing, isn't it?
Right. This kid like lived without any human contact. Like, okay. Coming up next, historical drama horror film based on the true story of a 17th century Roman Catholic priest accused of witchcraft, also focusing on a nun that incited the accusations and also was accused of being sexually promiscuous. Real or fake?
Riley, you go first as a guest.
I'll say real on that one.
I'm gonna say fake.
That one is real. Damn. Good work, Riley. It's called The Devils by Ken Russell. It was one of the films that in the 1970s it was a part of a string of controversy with the MPAA because they wanted to give it an X rating, but the UK did not. Ultimately, they did release it as an X rating. They agreed to release it only if the UK also gave it an X rating, and they did. Vanessa Redgrave as the sexually repressed nun in that film.
Interesting.
Coming up next, 1979, American neo-noir crime drama featuring James Woods and Ted Danson about the infamous LAPD detectives Carl Hettinger and Ian Campbell, who were kidnapped and driven to a nearby crop of onions where one of the detectives was shot and killed while another narrowly escaped and was chased on foot by his kidnappers for multiple days. Real or fake?
Riley, what do you think?
I want to say fake.
I'm going to say fake too.
That one's real again, guys. Got you with the 3 in a row.
I don't remember that.
It's insane. I want to see this movie. It's called The Onion Fields. And
God, it sounds like an onion
No,
article.
Ted Danson was even doing movies in 1979.
yeah.
Or was that was the incident? It was 1979.
No. It's from the film. It was 1979. I have to assume that he's the one of the two detective. He's the detective that gets killed rather than the one that runs away. So James Woods for another hour and a half. I don't know. We'll see. Okay. Next one. We're at number 4 out of 5. In 1950, this 1976 film takes place. Jacqueline Cato was a bride-to-be who, still living on her own with her elderly mother, kept claiming hearing a, quote, phantom whistler who hid at night in the shrubbery outside her house. And while her mother never believed her, the police chief did, though the police chief would never reveal the identity of the whistler. And when the police chief died, it turned out it was he himself that was catcalling her from the bushes. Real or fake?
Riley, go.
Oh, fake.
Fake.
Yeah, that one's fake. But it would make a good movie.
Yeah, it sounds awesome.
Was he catcalling me? Because he was in the
Yes. No, I think that could definitely work, even though I just spoiled the ending. Last but not least, 1976 thriller based on the 1946 Texarkana Moonlight Murders, featuring the B-movie proficiency of Charles B. Pierce, who was involved with the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre a few years prior. These murders that the film is based on involved a serial killer that attacked a small Texas town every 21 days and was not caught until his 8th and final victim. True or false?
This is true. It's the Town of Dread Sundown.
Oh my gosh. Okay. That's the first time where you said it was true and knew the movie I was talking about.
I just watched this. I watched this a few times.
I will,
really?
I will also say true.
Nice. Oh, I didn't know about this movie at all. Is it worth watching? I take it, Dan?
I wouldn't say that. I mean, if you're a horror
You said you've seen it a few times.
I mean, I love horror films, so it's like if you like horror films and that kind of stuff, it's dated as hell, but it's fun. It's a fun watch.
It sounds fun.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's also they quoted it in Scream. She's she's walking around and everybody's out because of curfew. She goes, "It's like the Town of Dread Sundown." That's actually how I found out about the movie.
Nice.
But yeah, it's like an old sort of like culty kind of classic horror film.
Cool. Well, without, I feel like our general consensus, right, is that the 70s were pretty depressing.
Really sad.
And that's why they had some of the best films, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, sad art is good art, always.
Oh boy. Thanks so much for having us. Thanks so much for joining us, Riley.
I think that's the right way of saying that. Thanks for having us, Riley.
Twist. Film Choice has been Riley's show all along.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
So anyway, thanks for being here. And then our final episode of this cycle is going to be In Cold Blood and Compulsion, which I've never seen. So that'll be coming up next. Thanks for listening. This has been Film Trace.